This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Wow, we've got a great crowd tonight. Aloha, and welcome to the monthly public presentation of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. Thank you all for coming tonight. The Vegetarian Society of Hawaii is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. From a handful of pioneering founders back in 1990 to becoming one of the largest vegetarian organizations in the nation, we've continued to promote human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education. You can also go to our website, vsh.org, that's vsh.org, to see videos of this and many of our previous presentations. You'll also find lots of other great information there, including recipes, our famous dining guide, past newsletters, and even a link to our new Facebook page. It's now time for our special guest, Ann Tanaka. We're delighted to have her here tonight. Ms. Tanaka is a master gardener under the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. She also did a minimum of 40 hours of volunteer work a year, teaching people research-based information on home gardening. She hopes to convey that she has no special skills, no background in farming, not much time, and only a tiny lot that's not conducive to gardening. But even she can grow something fresh and nutritious to eat. So if she can do it, so can you. This evening, she will present Urban Gardening. Please welcome Ann Tanaka.
Thank you very much for the warm welcome. Thanks, Carl. Okay, well, I am really nervous about talking tonight because I saw your guest list of past presenters. You know, you had PhDs and MDs and best-selling authors and everything, and I am, like my intro, don't have any special education or background in horticulture or agriculture. I don't have any special gardening skills or anything. I didn't grow up on a farm. So why am I here? Well, I asked Carl that same question. I said, "You sure you want me to speak?" And he said, well, he kind of wants the perspective of an ordinary person with no special background to share how you can grow veggies at your home. And so hopefully I can at least inspire you to try it if you've never tried it. I do always have something growing. I don't grow everything I eat, but I do have things growing all the time. So hopefully you'll get some ideas and try it for yourself. I'd like to take a moment first to talk about the program that I represent. I am a volunteer with the Oahu Master Gardeners under the University of Hawaii College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources. The Cooperative Extension Program sponsors a Master Gardener program. Assuming that you guys are here tonight because you have an interest in gardening, I would really encourage you to check out our program if you'd like to get some education and get involved in our program. It's a very interesting and worthwhile program to join. And I did meet some new Master Gardeners here tonight, so that was really cool. I'm going to now try to get my slides. So here's some information and website for our Master Gardener program and the phone number if you want to write that down, or you can probably just Google Oahu Master Gardener and find out more about our program, how you can enroll. We do have a helpline. If you have plant questions, you can call Monday through Friday, 9 to noon, and ask about your plant questions, or email us at that web address you see right here. So I'd like to also mention that Our Master Gardener and University of Hawaii Cooperative Extension Program has a second Saturday program every month at the Pearl City Urban Garden. How many of you knew that we have a 30-acre urban garden right smack in the middle of Pearl City? I didn't even know until I joined the program, and I grew up near there. And entrance to the garden is free, but we do charge a nominal fee if we have some classes in the classroom. But we have tours, and those are all free. I really encourage you to check out our second Saturdays. If you look at this website here, we will have our schedule announced of what's coming up. In June, it's going to be about mangoes, pests and disease, and July and August is going to be about organic gardening. So it's going to be very exciting because I am particularly interested in organic gardening and edible gardening. But other master gardeners have all different interests, and some people are, experts in roses or tropical ornamentals and grass. If you ask me anything about grass, I don't know anything about it, so sorry. But Master Gardeners are available to answer your questions at the second Saturday events, and also they sell UH seed. In addition, the Master Gardeners attend the KCC Farmers Market on the last Saturday of each month, and they sell UH seed there and can answer your plant questions as well. So I encourage you to come down and check us out at Pearl City, especially at our second Saturday events. Now, this is just to show you what the website looks like. If you go to our website, the announcements of what's coming up will be shown there. All right, so UH seed, the Master Gardeners sell the UH seed for $1 a pack. That's probably like one of the best deals in town. There's a lot of seed in there, and the seeds are for plants that do well in Hawaii. Sometimes you have maybe if you visit a friend or relative in Wisconsin or Idaho and you taste this great corn up there and you go, oh, I got to bring it home, and try it over here, and it's lousy or it doesn't do well. It's because we have different conditions. If the corn over there is meant for the long days that they have up in that state, whereas in Hawaii we have very short summer days. So we had to develop special kind of corn that grows well in Hawaii. And the UH did do that. Dr. Brubaker at UH did some fantastic research and produced corn that does really well in Hawaii, tastes great. But then if you take that seed and you send it to your friend up in Idaho or Wisconsin, they might not have such great results because the corn is meant for Hawaii conditions. So my point is that the UH seed is meant for our type of climate and our conditions, and so you're going to have the best results when you grow in Hawaii by using those seeds. And it doesn't mean that you can't try other seeds. If you can accept maybe some things will not do as well as other things, and you might have to accept some failure, but I like to try different things, so I will order things from mainline catalogs. But for beginning gardeners, I would recommend that you do start by trying the UH seed because you'll have probably the most chance of success if you use that. You can go to the University of Hawaii CTAHR website. They have all the seeds that we sell, descriptions of it. This is like the papaya seeds that they sell. The home gardening packets sell for $1. They do sell other types of seeds that cost a little bit more, like the hybrids that Master Gardeners don't sell, but we just stick to the $1 packet type. All right, so the other thing I want to mention is the free publications. CTAHR has a wealth of information on their free publication site. This is the web address, or you can just Google CTAHR free publications and you'll probably get that website. If you go to the home gardening page, there are a lot of topics there, from composting to using culinary herbs. Here's an example of what that page looks like, and they're all in alphabetical order. We have a home gardening section as well as professional agricultural section. All right, so getting on to why do I want to grow my own food? Well, I have good control of what goes into that. I can grow organically or not. I know what kind of media I'm growing in. If I don't want my food to be grown in sewage sludge, I can choose not to. I know what I used for fertilizer, and I know if I didn't spray or I did spray, what I used. Now, when you go to a restaurant and you go to the salad bar, you don't always know what they put on the veggies to make it look nice and fresh, because there are a lot of chemicals that can make a vegetable look nice and fresh when it's really kind of old. Also, in the supermarket, you don't know if they've used anti-sprouting chemicals on the veggies so that it would look nice on the display. But if I grow my own, I'm in control. And so that's why I like to grow my own. Freshness and flavor. If you've ever grown your own vine-ripened tomatoes, you cannot compare the taste with something that you pick up in the supermarket. When you pick it at its peak, fresh and peak ripeness, you will have this incredible complex flavor that there is, just doesn't compare to the type of tomatoes you typically get in the supermarket, because the growers typically have to ship it green. And when you pick it green, you're not picking at its peak, so you don't develop that great complex flavor. Convenience and economics. Before I started gardening, I used to buy my basils and herbs at the store, and I would have to spend a lot of money to buy half-dead, wilted basils and stuff, but now that I can grow my own, I just pick it when I need it. If I come home late and I've had a long day, I don't want to stand in line at the supermarket, I can just go outside and pick my fresh salad greens and whip something up in no time. And variety. When you grow your own, you can have so much choice of what you want to grow. There's so many things that are not in the supermarket you can try to grow. Now, a lot of people say to me that they would like to grow their own veggies, but they don't have any yard, they have a very small space. My clay soil is so hard like concrete, I can't dig in it. The pests always get it, and it always dies. I don't know why. Well, I guess Master Gardener tip number 1 would be to try growing in containers. And that's how I do all my gardening now, especially since I developed arthritis in the knee and I can't get down into the dirt anymore. I grow everything in containers now. And I love doing that because you don't need any yard at all to do that. I can put my containers anywhere. I can put them in the driveway. I can put them on my sidewalk right next to the house. I can put them where I would normally not have a garden. And depending on the type of container you have, you can control the moisture a lot better than when it's in the ground. Like I can use a bucket and drill holes on the side if I have a water hogging plant and I want to keep it very wet. Or if I want the plant to have very good drainage, I can drill a lot of holes at the bottom of the container. So you can do a lot to control the moisture better than just in the ground. Also, sunlight and wind, I can move that plant around. If someplace is too windy, too sunny, not enough sun, you can move that container to where it's best suited. No digging, so less work for me. And the biggest advantage is that you can avoid soil-borne pests and disease. Now, one of the biggest problems in Hawaii are the root knot nematodes that attack the roots of a lot of agricultural crops. And in the past, the agriculture business really had to use strong chemicals to control the nematodes. The nematodes are microscopic roundworms, but they suck on the roots, parts of the plant that are underground, and they can do just major serious damage. They will stunt the plant and can even kill it. A lot of fungal spores can sit in the soil and just stay there until you grow something, and then they'll attack it. So you can avoid all of that by just growing in a container. As long as you don't go out and get your soil from the ground and put it in the container. Just use potting soil. Don't put soil from the ground into your container, and you can avoid all of those problems associated with soil-borne disease and pests. So I just wanted to show you my almost organic ginger. I didn't use any chemical treatment or anything, but this came out of a 5-gallon bucket that I controlled the moisture by having it, on the wet side. And it was just amazing how much ginger came out of there. I think in the past, when I used to go to the store and look for organic ginger, they were like really tiny and shriveled. And that's probably because of the nematode problem in the soil. But in the bucket, you can see how plump, and these were really nice and juicy. So ginger did really well, better than in the ground when I grew it in the bucket. Well, ginger takes about 9-10 months or so. You usually plant it around March, and then you harvest around December. So I'm going to go over some of the planting basics, and we're going to start with seeds. And I have to admit that I am like a seedaholic, and in fact I left some seed catalogs over there on the publication desk in case anybody wanted to thumb through any of them. Those are probably more of my favorite seed catalogs. I've had good experience with them. I mentioned UH seed would be best suited for Hawaiian climate and conditions. That doesn't mean you can't experiment and try seed catalogs. You want to look, when you're looking at a seed catalog, look for information on heat and disease-tolerant varieties. Because, Hawaii is very hot, and we have a lot of pests and disease here that may not be an issue on the mainland. So some of the catalogs, when you look at the catalog, the description of everything will be, oh, it tastes great, does well, my favorite. Those are not that helpful. So you want to look at some catalogs that will actually give you some plant information. And one of the catalogs that I really like is Johnny Seeds. And you might think, well, Johnny Seeds is actually based in Maine. And you might think, well, why am I ordering something from Maine? But I found that they do have very good information on their catalogs, and they do offer a wide variety of seeds, and they tell you which ones are disease and pest tolerant and heat tolerant. So I look for those, and those have really done well for me. I store my seeds in the refrigerator. And sometimes I go a little overboard, so I take up too much refrigerator space, so we can't store things like, food and stuff. But you do want to keep your seeds cold. Now, seeds are living things, so they are going to age and degrade over time. And so how to slow down that aging is you keep it cold and dry. So I usually put it in an airtight container, and I might pop one of those food-grade desiccants in there, like your vitamins sometimes have those desiccants. And after I use that bottle up, I'll throw that in the seed box. Make sure it's airtight, and I'll store it in the refrigerator. And when you do that, you can preserve your seeds for a number of years. Some tomato seeds are good for, 10 years, and they still sprout. A lot of veggies, though, they usually recommend about three years or so on the average to store in the fridge. I know some people have said that they store it in the freezer, but I think it might be too cold. I just store it in the fridge, and I've done fine, yeah. I do know some people do store in the freezer. All right, now when you do store in the refrigerator, you want to make sure that when you take it out, it's going to condense, so you want to make sure that you don't get the seed pack all wet. I did observe one of those big local chain stores, I'm not going to mention any names, they had their seed racks out in their plant area where they, grow all the plants and everything. And I was kind of surprised because, that area is kind of humid, it's warm, the sun comes in because, all the plants are over there. And then I saw the worker watering the plants with the hose and the water splashing all over the seed rack. So I thought, I don't think those seeds are going to have very good germination. So if you see something like that, I would probably not shop for seeds there. Just remember, keep your seeds cold and dry, and they'll last for a while. Certain seeds, though, even if you do store it properly, like papaya seed, will probably only be good about a year in the fridge. But a lot of veggie seeds, greens and your tomatoes, they can go much longer for several years. Now, when you plant your seeds, I've seen in the store all kinds of fancy things to plant seeds, like peat pots and all kinds of stuff you can buy. But I do stuff really cheap, so I just save recycled containers like, your yogurt cups, Jell-O cups, small little plastic containers. I think I drive people crazy because nothing can get thrown away at my house. It's always got to be saved for something. And I'll poke holes in it, put potting soil or seed starting mix or something in it, and then I'll plant my seeds in there. Now, you can start your seeds in a number of different things. When you start your seed, you don't have to have super fertile soil because the seed actually contains nutrients to help the plant sprout initially. Some people will insist on using vermicast, which is worm compost, and that's really, really good stuff. But not everybody has access to a lot of vermicast. So if you can't get your hands on vermicast, you can use a number of different things. Some people really like to sprout their seeds in vermiculite. And basically, vermiculite is a natural mineral called mica that's heated up to very high temperatures, so it sort of explodes and forms like little flat chips. They look like potato chips, tiny little potato chips. The advantage of vermiculite is that because they're flat and the way they lay on top of each other, they can hold a lot of water. And water is very important when you're trying to germinate seed because you need to keep the seed moist all the time. Don't ever let it dry out during the germination process. Now, not everybody goes to the trouble of getting vermiculite to sprout seed. You can just actually use peat and perlite is another thing that people use. Now, peat or sphagnum moss is organic material that's harvested from bogs. It is organic, but it doesn't decompose very rapidly. It also holds a lot of water. I've read some types of sphagnum can hold 20 times its dry weight in water. So it is very good for starting seed, but it can compact and get too tight. So a lot of times you'll see seed mixes, they contain peat, but they also contain perlite. Perlite is a volcanic rock that is heated up again so that it sort of like pops like popcorn. So you've probably seen those little white, balls in potting soil, and that's perlite. It makes the mix light and airy so that it doesn't get all compacted. Okay, because plant roots need to breathe as well as they need water. So perlite is often added to keep the mix very loose. Now, if you don't want to mix your own peat and perlite, you can just go ahead and just buy potting soil or seed starting mix ready-made from the store. And any of those things should work just fine for sprouting your seed. And the key is that you want to keep that mix moist, and you don't want it sopping wet, but you want it moist enough like a squeezed sponge. And you want to keep it moist at all times during the germination process. Now, what I usually do is, if you've ever seen containers that have the organic salad mix, the plastic box with the lid, that kind of stuff, I used to save those and I wash them out, and I'll put my seed containers, my seed sprouting containers in there, and I'll put the lid on. I'll leave a little crack in it so it gets a little air, but mostly it'll stay humid there. And I'll just leave my seed sprouting cups in there until they sprout. And you don't have to really water or anything until they sprout if it takes a few days. But you might want to just double check every once in a while, in case the lid blew off or, it did happen to dry out, because you want to make sure that it's consistently moist around the seed while it's germinating. Okay, so how deep do you sow it? And generally, if you have a good seed company, they're going to tell you right on the packet how deep and, how to sow your seed. But if you don't have any other information, as a general rule of thumb, you can think of it as you want to plant your seed about 2 to 3 times the width of that seed. So like for small seed like tomato, lettuce, Chinese cabbage, like pak choy, go about 1/4 inch, press it into the soil about 1/4 inch. In medium-sized seed like beets, you might want to go deeper, about 1/2 inch. In large seeds like beans and cucumbers, maybe 1 inch. And if you're planting ginger, you're actually planting, a lot of people call it ginger root, but it's actually technically a rhizome, which is an underground stem. And when you plant the ginger, you might want to go about 2 inches or more. And the main thing to remember is don't let your media dry out during the germination. Keep it humid and moist during the whole germination process. Okay, so here's just a picture of my, I think those are Jell-O cups or something, or yogurt cups. And I sprouted, I think those were like my pak choy seeds. I'm going to have to transplant those after it sprouts into individual containers to space them out better. And I have it in that plastic box that I mentioned to you that, I put it in the box and then I put the lid on. You can also use, a plastic bag or something, anything to keep the humidity high. Okay, so when the seeds sprout, you don't need sunlight to sprout a seed. But once it sprouts, you do want to give it sunlight and water. Otherwise, if you just keep it in a dark place, the seedling is going to get really leggy. And that's because the seedling is going to be struggling and growing really long, looking for light. And you don't want that to happen because you'll get a really long, skinny stem, and then it'll have the first seed leaves on it, and the leaves are going to be too heavy. And so what's going to happen is, because the leaves are too heavy and the stem is so long and skinny, it's going to flop over. And when it flops over, it's going to kink. And the main vascular system of the plant, the main plumbing, just like your veins and everything, the main plumbing is going to kink. And then when it kinks, you can kill the plant because it's not going to be able to transport the nutrients and water up and down from the root to the leaf. So you don't want to have leggy plants. So you want to give it sunlight. But when the seed first sprouts, you don't put it directly in full sunlight. You kind of want to move it gradually into more and more sunlight. Now, certain plants have sensitive roots, and they don't like to be transplanted. And so in those cases, you might want to start the seeds a little different. Like you might want to start the seeds in your final container rather than using those little cups and transplanting. But if you're really skillful and you do the transplanting really early on, sometimes you can do it. Like I do my Chinese cabbage like I showed you. I tend to sprout them in little containers, and then I'll transplant them when they're really young so that the roots are not too long when I transplant. But anyway, here's a list of certain plants that you probably want to avoid transplanting until you get a little bit more skilled. And they include carrots, cilantro, beans, squash, corn, cucumber, Chinese cabbage, like pak choys, melon, and pumpkin. And in those cases, when you have a lot of seeds sprouting very close together, the key is not to disturb the roots. So you'll let some grow. So you probably want to let the biggest and the healthiest one grow, and the other smaller ones, you'll probably just want to snip it with a scissors. So that'll, cull those plants, and you just let the strongest one grow. And you give it enough room that it'll grow, to a nice size. Because if you don't give it enough space, then, you might end up with smaller plants. Now, when you transplant, if you're transplanting outside, you want to try to avoid drying out the roots when you transplant. So I usually transplant at night or on a cloudy day to minimize the drying out and the shock for the plant. And when you handle the plant, you want to handle it by the seed leaves, not the stem, because remember I said the stem contains the plant's main vascular system. You don't want to pinch that stem and, kink that vascular system. So when you transplant, handle it by the seed leaves or the regular leaves and not the stem. Now, the seed leaves are called cotyledons. Those are the first leaves that you will see when a plant sprouts. Those are not really the true leaves. Those are the seed leaves. They contain the plant nutrients that nourish the plant during the initial germination stage. The second set of leaves that come out are the true leaves, and so then you can recognize what the plant is going to look like. When you sprout your plants, and I'll show you an example in a little while, if you leave it in the pot too long and you don't transplant it, the roots will start getting really long and can get over-tangled, and the plant may suffer from poor nutrition. So let me show you an example of what not to do. This is what we did by accident. We were growing tomato seeds, and you can see we can actually sprout these tomato seeds really close together and then just untangle them. But we left them in the sprouting container too long. And so you can see actually some of these leaves are yellowing. That shows a nitrogen deficiency. And you can see some of the purple color underneath the leaf and on the stem. That shows a phosphorus deficiency because we didn't fertilize it. So you can see it's malnutrition on this plant. And you can see how the roots got really, really long. They're all tangled up. Now for tomatoes, that's not too bad because tomatoes are pretty forgiving about breaking their roots. And in fact, tomatoes are kind of different in that it's actually advantageous to break their root. Tomatoes initially start out growing a very long taproot, and if you disturb or break that root, it'll stimulate the plant to produce feeder roots. And when you get feeder roots, the plant will become more healthy because the more roots you have, the better. So the feeder roots will spread out. You'll have abundant roots if you break that initial taproot. So people often deliberately break the tomato root. I mean, that's not to say you're going to just break off the whole root, but just break it a little bit and it'll be enough to stimulate the growth of feeder roots on the tomato. Now, this is not the case for other plants like carrots and cilantro that don't want their roots disturbed at all. So tomato is a special case. Okay, and let me go back to that other slide. Just wanting to emphasize that when you do transplant, you want to transplant it in potting soil and not topsoil and not dirt from the ground. Okay, and this is to avoid those pests and disease problems that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to mention a little bit about tomatoes. Tomatoes are a little bit different in that they sprout roots from their stems. So if you want to grow tomatoes, you can start them from seed, but you can also clone them if you have an existing tomato plant. I have an example over here. You see, this is the main tomato stem right here, the main stem. And then you see this right here is the leaf stem. This is the leaf, and this is the main stem. Now, right inside this crotch here is another stem growing. This is what we call a sucker. All right. Now, the sucker has all the genetics to produce a complete and fruiting tomato plant all by itself. So all you have to do is break off that sucker and stick it in some soil, moist soil, and root it, and you will have a clone. You can have a whole new tomato plant with fruits and everything. Now, you cannot do that with the leaf because the leaf does not have all the correct genetics in it. So it's only when you break off this sucker. And so you can recognize the sucker because it's going to grow like inside the crutch of the main stem and the leaf. Now, tomatoes sprout roots from the stem, and so sometimes you will see little like goosebumps all over the stem, and some people get all worried and stuff and say, oh, I think my tomato is all diseased because it has all these bumps on it. But really, those are just the precursors of roots that will come out. And a lot of times if the stem sort of touches the ground or something, then you'll see the roots come out. So you can break off the suckers and start a whole new tomato plant, and you can start tomato plants from seeds. Now, going back to the other slide, when you plant one of those suckers or when you transplant a tomato, you want to transplant them deep because the roots are going to sprout from the stem. When you do a transplant of a tomato, you want to peel off all the bottom leaves and just leave maybe the top 2 or 3 leaves at the very top. And then you're going to bury the whole stem And that's because when you bury the stem, the roots will come out from the stem, and you'll have more roots, and more roots mean healthier plant. So you're just going to leave the very top few leaves above the soil line when you either transplant the tomatoes or you transplant the suckers. Okay. Now, when you're trying to root a sucker, initially you want to sort of keep it in a shady place, not in full sun, and you want to make sure your soil media is damp and moist at all time. Don't let it dry out. And when you see new leaves come out of that plant, that's when you know it has rooted, and then you can transplant that. Before that happens, don't put it out in full sun because it might be, might get shocked, or it might be too dry or too hot for the plant. Oh, you can break it off, yes. The question was, when you see a sucker like this, do you just break it off, or do you have to cut it with a scissors? Either way is okay. Yeah, I guess if you want a cleaner cut, you can cut it with a scissors, but sometimes it just comes off when you break it. You can just snap it off. Final container, you can use a number of different types of containers. I really like what they call self-watering containers because you can really control the moisture level. Now, they sell self-watering containers. Some gardening catalogs will sell it to you for a really expensive price, plus shipping to Hawaii, it comes to a really, really expensive price. But you can actually just make your own, but you can probably Google self-watering container, and you'll find a wealth of information on the web of how to construct your own self-watering container. Basically, what that means is just you have a water reservoir at your bottom of your container, and then your growing media is going to be sitting above that water reservoir. You're going to have a little platform, and you have your growing media above that. And then in certain places, there'll be like a little pocket where it dips down, and your growing media goes down into the water reservoir, so it's soaking wet. The soil will be soaking wet in those places, and what happens is it wicks the water up from the bottom. So you essentially are watering from the bottom. And I found this actually to be, a lot more healthy for the plant. You can also buy some self-watering containers, some small ones. I've seen them on sale at Walmart. This green one at front is like a planter box right here. It's about 6 inches. I think you can see it that well, but I think they might call it self-watering container if you look on the shelf. And then you'll see that the growing platform is elevated, and then in certain places it dips down lower to the bottom of the container, and the bottom of the container will be flooded with water. Now, lettuce grows great in those containers, but you can also do just a regular 5-gallon bucket. Like I have my pineapple over there growing in a 5-gallon bucket, and I keep meaning to get rid of it, but every time I say I'm going to get rid of it, then another baby pineapple comes up, so I can never really get rid of it. And it's just amazing how it grows. I have like green onions. I sort of like to mix up what I plant. I've got green onions together with the lettuce, and then in the front I've got some choy sum and some romaine. And in the background I've got some rosemary and all different kind of stuff. So I like to smash a lot of different things together in a really small space. Now, if you construct your own self-watering container, like for my pineapple, or if you have like ginger or taro, I have taro growing, those are like really water-hogging plants, and you want there to be a lot of, you want your container to retain a lot of water. Now, traditional pots will have holes on the bottom, right? So when you water, sometimes the water will just come right out the drain holes, and they won't moisten all of the soil evenly. And sometimes that causes problems. Now, some herbs and peppers, that might be fine because they like to stay on the dry side. So that might work well for that. But certain other plants like tomatoes, water-hogging plants like ginger, they really need very even and consistent moisture. So what I'll do is I'll get like a 5-gallon bucket, and I'll drill drainage holes, maybe about 2 inches up from the bottom, so that the bottom, when I water it, will always be wet. Now, some people maybe don't like that because it can get kind of stinky on the bottom when you clean out the pot later on, but actually it works pretty well. And the ginger that I showed you earlier, that's how I grew that ginger. And I have, choy sum and bok choy and all kinds of stuff growing in that type of container. Okay, I think the question was, do I use the same potting soil for growing all of my plants? And basically, probably very similar, because I like the organic potting soil. There's a lot of, potting soils out there, and they're probably all good, but because I like to grow organically or as organically as practical, I'm not always 100% organic, I like to look for things that have the OMRI seal on it, and that stands for Organic Materials Review Institute. And the one that I've found locally is a Gardner and Bloom. They're a little bit more expensive than the other local potting soils, and I'm not saying the other ones are, not as good. They're just fine, but when I see the OMRI seal, I know that it doesn't have any sewage sludge in it. Also, there are other ones that are not necessarily organic, like I think, Super Soil will say on the package, no sewage sludge. So, there's no sewage sludge, whereas maybe other brands are silent on it, so you don't know what's in it. I like the Gardner and Bloom because on the package label it contains mycorrhizal fungi, and that's a whole different lecture, but this is like fungus that associates with certain plant roots, and it helps the plant to mine nutrients more efficiently. And they do really well with tomatoes, not so well with brassicas, and brassicas are like your broccolis and your cabbage family. They don't associate very well with that group, but they do associate well with, tomatoes and other veggies. And because it has the OMRI seal, that's the one that I personally like. But it doesn't mean that if you try other brands that you won't have good results with other brands as well. So it's just my preference. Before I talk about fertilizing, I just wanted to mention another thing about self-watering containers. And I'm going to skip over and show you. Here's the self-watering containers that we built at our Pearl City Garden. So if you are out there, visit us at maybe one of our second Saturday events. Hopefully we still have this set up. We had a tomato second Saturday workshop, and so we did this for that workshop. But you can see that we made these self-watering containers out of just ordinary, Rubbermaid type, I think 18-gallon containers. And there's a reservoir of water on the bottom, and tomatoes are real water hogs, so we had like about a 5-gallon reservoir of water down at the bottom so that they could last a whole day. If it was windy or very sunny, it'd suck up all that water. Down here, we also have, styrofoam fish coolers that we salvaged from a fish company. They were discarding a lot of these. They get their fish shipments, I guess, in these styrofoam coolers, and then it all goes in the trash. So we fished them out and decided to recycle and plant things in them. If you go to KCC, if you visit KCC Farmers Market, take a look at their herb garden. They have a beautiful herb garden. And they've done this as well. They've used the fish coolers. In fact, actually, that's where we got the idea. They use the fish coolers, and they grow all their herbs in it. And they've done a really beautiful job. It doesn't look, tacky or anything. It's, they've got the coolers with all different kinds of nice plants growing in them. Now, tomatoes are very susceptible to root knot nematode. The pest that I said attacks a lot of the agricultural plants. So that's why we grew a lot of them in containers rather than growing it in the ground. And we had a lot better results growing it this way than growing it in the ground. And another thing I forgot to mention on the self-watering container, we never overhead water. The other thing with tomatoes is that they're very, very susceptible to fungal disease. So if you overhead water and you sprinkle the leaves all the time and the leaves stay wet, you get a lot of fungal disease. So we try to keep it as dry as possible. We mulch the top of the container, And we actually have a pipe going down into the bottom reservoir. So we water the plants from the bottom. And this, in addition to, not spreading disease, this allows the plant to grow deep roots. And that's what you want to do. You want your plant to have deep roots, not develop shallow roots. When you water on the top and you just sprinkle the top, the plant is going to respond by sending roots up on the surface. And those are not so good because those can dry out really easily. So you want to encourage your plant to develop deep roots for better plant health. And so the self-watering container with the reservoir in the bottom forces the plant to seek out the water and develop deep roots. So now, fertilizing. The major nutrients that you want to give the plant are generally what you see on the package of fertilizer. We call NPK ratio. You'll usually see 3 numbers on the package. First one is nitrogen, and the nitrogen is important for developing nice green leaves. And if you want organic sources of nitrogen, you can get that with alfalfa pellets even. Phosphorus is needed for development of flowers and fruits and strong roots. That's the middle number on your NPK ratio. And you need that for good fruiting. So if you're growing something like tomatoes, you usually want to see a higher P number than your NNK. So when you see the 3 numbers on the package and you see something like 5, 10, 5, that's probably a good one for tomatoes. A higher P number than your nitrogen and potassium. Now, if you give a tomato plant too much nitrogen, a very high first number, not that much P and K, you're going to see a lot of beautiful green leaves on the plant, but you're not going to get any fruit. So, you want to kind of keep the nitrogen sort of low and then emphasize the phosphorus, keep that one higher. And the K is, you can have it equal or a little less. Now, the potassium is generally for overall plant health and fruits. So that's also important. All 3 of these are important to have. Potassium, if you're growing bananas, that's really important because bananas need a lot of potassium, and bananas are a great source of potassium. Okay, so macronutrients. There are other things besides NPK that are needed by the plant, like calcium, sulfur, magnesium. And oftentimes these are also provided in your fertilizer, or they may already be in your soil. Micronutrients are things like copper and zinc that are just needed in trace amounts. So a really good fertilizer, often organic fertilizers have all these macro and micronutrients. They just have it naturally. Also, organic fertilizers generally are naturally slow release. But if you use like a liquid conventional fertilizer, those will tend to wash out really quickly. Now, you just think of it like, when you eat your meals, you don't eat all your meals for the week in one sitting, right? You have to spread it out in increments. And just like this, with plants, you want to give it a slow, steady feed of nutrients. The other thing is, when you feed your plant, a lot of times it's better to give it less, more frequently, than give it more, less frequently. Because if you over-fertilize, you can actually kill your plant. Compost tea actually enhances the fertilization. It's not actually a fertilizer in itself, but if you use it together with a fertilizer, it enhances the plant's ability to take up the nutrients. Like vermicast works in the same way. UH did a study where they combined compost tea or vermicast with regular fertilizer, and they found the best plant growth was when you combine the two, better than just using one or the other. Now, compost tea is great because it introduces a lot of microbial action into your mix, your soil mix. The microbes help to metabolize the nutrients and help the plant roots to mine the nutrients. The combined action of having the nutrients and the compost tea is great, but you wouldn't use it by itself. You would need to supplement that with, maybe if you're organic, you might want to supplement it with organic fertilizer as well. Do I recommend organic? There's a lot of products out there that it just depends on what you're growing. Some of them come in liquid form, like seaweed emulsion. And a lot of the organic fertilizers contain micronutrients too, so it's very healthy for the plant. And it can get kind of confusing too, because there's just so many choices out there. I try different things. Have you ever been to Waimanalo Feed Store? I bought a bag of alfalfa pellets, and I used that for fertilizer. And those actually did great for the greens, because they're high in nitrogen. And usually the one thing that you have to be careful about when you're using conventional fertilizing is not to burn your plants, because if you use too strong fertilizer, your plant can burn and die. But organic fertilizers are generally gentle and slow release, so you don't have that issue when you use organic fertilizers. An amount of compost. It allows, if you just use that one compost and put it in one bucket, then you're only going to benefit one pot. But if you make a tea out of it, then you can water a lot of plants with it. And so expand how many plants that can benefit from the compost. Now, vermicompost, the University of Hawaii has a lot of articles and information. I really encourage you to look at it. I have a worm bin at home, and it makes vermicompost. It's not really earthworms, but certain kind of worms that are doing the work. And they're breaking down your veggies and your discards, and they turn it into really nutritious compost. So, instead of throwing away your food scraps, when you're chopping your carrots and your, all the stuff that you'd normally throw in the trash, you keep it and you put it in your worm bin instead. And so you can recycle that and turn it into really good things for your plant. They have articles on the UH Free Publication website that you can pick up, and this is one on vermicomposting. And there's also an excellent video that I really hope that you guys take a look at. This is the website if you want to write it down. But you can also probably just Google CTAHR vermicompost video maybe and get that. Professor Ted Radovich was very instrumental in putting together that video, and it's his voice that you'll hear on the video, and he shows you what kinds of worms to use and how how to manage a worm bin, and it's a really nice video to look at. Pest control. There are some vegetarians that I don't like, and those are the six-legged types. But not all six-legged creatures are bad, because a lot of them actually help us, and they eat the pests that we don't want eating our food. So CTAR has great information on pest control, and I'm particularly interested in the organic pest control, beneficial insects. They show pictures so that you can sort of try to kind of study what they look like, so you don't squash them or get rid of them by accident. And you can see, the hoverflies, lacewings, lady beetles. These are all good bugs to have in your garden because they're going to eat your bad pests. And predatory mites, wasps, all kinds of wasps there. Here's a picture of a lady beetle. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but you see this dark thing over here? I don't know if you can see it very well. It kind of looks sort of hideous, I guess. So maybe if you see it, you might get scared and squash it, but don't do that, because this is a lady beetle larvae, and they are fantastic. They're the best thing to have in your garden because they're going to eat all your mealybugs and aphids. This CTAR website, all kinds of links of the different types of predators that you would want in your garden and how to attract them and what they're good for. And they describe this lady beetle larvae as alligator-like. I guess it maybe sort of looks like an alligator. I don't know. It's pretty ugly, but it's a great bug to have in your garden. Aphids and mealybugs that they feed on, those pests can be very dangerous because they can carry some very bad disease, such as tomato virus that can actually just wipe out your tomatoes. And once you have a virus problem on your plant, there's pretty much nothing you can do other than just trash bagging that plant and throwing it away, because there's nothing you can do once it gets it. So, if you've got a good balance of good bugs that can take care of the bad bugs, then that's what you want. A lot of people, I guess, when they see a bug, they'll rush to get the pesticide, or, even if it's organic like neem, you have to watch what you're using, because neem is often, touted as a good organic pesticide, and it is. It is organic, it's plant-based, but it's also broad spectrum, so it's not selective in what it kills. So if you spray neem all over the place, you could be killing your beneficial insects as well as your bad bugs. You don't want to wipe out your beneficial insects. You want to minimize your use of broad-spectrum pesticides. And also, to encourage beneficial insects to come into your yard, you want to plant a lot of flowering, nectar-producing plants. For attracting ladybugs, for example, they recommend sunflowers and daisies, buckwheat, fennel, dill, parsley, and dandelion. And these are things that the lady beetles like and will attract them to your garden. And so what I like to do is I like to interplant my veggies with a lot of these flowering plants. And, I'm not going to say that this is 100% foolproof and it works. I still have bug problems, but, it'll help to attract bugs, and at the very least, it looks pretty. So some of the treatments that you can use, pesticides that you can use that don't have as much impact as broad-spectrum pesticides include things like oils or insecticidal soap, because they are very specific to your target insect. They will not hurt things like beetles, lady beetles, hard-shelled type of insects, but they will go after the soft-bodied insects, like your aphids, your white flies, and those are really notorious at carrying a lot of the diseases that cause a lot of problems on agricultural crops. So thank you very much, and I hope that you will visit us at the Pearl City Garden on our second Saturday event and find out more information about plants there. So thank you.
Thank you, Aunt Tanaka, for giving us such a wonderfully inspirational and informative talk about growing our own veggies, and I think we can all go home and do that now. We really appreciate that, and thank you all for coming. Have a safe return home. Good night, everyone.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.